I guess now we can move directly to, as I mentioned, I introduced earlier, Stephen Burns and the next panel. So Stephen, come on down. I think I forgot to mention, I know how I forgot that, but not only Stephen is an energy expert, not only is he a humble guy, but he's also a Titusville native. So when we were trying to get people to come up to Venango County a few years ago, and they were kicking the email around the federal government and around the State Department and USAID, it ended up on Stephen's desk. And we were very, very happy. He was at our first conference, and we're very happy to have him back here as the Drake Dialogues chair. So Stephen, come on up.
Thanks, everyone. It's an honor to be here. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Stephen Burns. I am currently the Vice President for Energy and National Security at the Institute for Security and Technology, but more importantly, I'm a Titusville native, and Andrew asked me to chair the dialogues this year. So for those that are out of town, welcome to the Oil Region National Heritage Area, where, as already has been mentioned, in 1859, the modern energy story began. Through the dialogues, we're hoping to achieve today not just a remembrance of that history, but also to write the next chapter. How can communities like ours here in northwestern Pennsylvania shape a pragmatic, secure, and prosperous energy future? Over the next 2 days, we're going to test our ideas through the panels through 4 touchstones: reliability, affordability, security, and stewardship of the environment. If a proposal can't speak to all 4, we're going to ask you to push it harder. And we'll ask to keep this grounded in real places and with real trade-offs, from well pads and substations to fiber routes and factory floors. Remember, if Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia were a country, we'd rank among the world's top natural gas producers. And with that scale brings a lot of opportunity, but also responsibility to future generations. So today we're going to start local and concretely. Panel 1 is going to tackle orphaned wells, how to fix them, find them, and how to fund those efforts, because resilience begins with cleaning up our own backyard. After Fireside on Rural America's Energy Crossroads, we're going to move into Panel 2 on how to leverage our regional strengths: natural gas supply, skilled labor, rights of way, and so on, and how we're going to power the data economy, but also with guardrails that protect reliability and ratepayers. We're going to weave in themes of preservation, and then at the end of the day, celebrate the heritage that got us here. So just a few ground rules before we start the dialogues, both to the audience, but to the panelists as well. Maybe somewhat hypocritically on my part, brevity, okay, and specificity, okay? Please cite examples, not slogans, okay? Second, to our panelists, please define acronyms where you can. We have a mix of audience here. We've got policymakers, engineers, investors, and neighbors. Okay. Third, and perhaps most importantly, civility. Okay. Strong views are welcome. Ad hominem attacks are not. Okay. And then finally, time discipline. We're going to try to keep the program moving today. I say that noting that my clock in the back of the room does not work. So I'm going to ask people here in the front to just give me like a 15-minute wave so I know that we need to start wrapping up the panels. Okay. And then, to close here, I think what do we want from these conversations? It's not consensus for its own sake, but clarity, where we have alignment to act, where there's friction to solve, and what each stakeholder, be it industry, government, academia, or the local community, can take home Wednesday and start doing to get us to that to the future. So thank you again to our hosts, sponsors, and to speakers for making time to come up. With that, let's get going. Panel 1, could you come to the stage? And while they're coming up, I'll give you the introduction. Just making sure. All right. So for panel 1, we're going to start with a topic of local interest, okay, but also with global application and impact. So the oil region has thousands of orphaned wells that create a number of environmental hazards, from oil seeping into rivers and drinking water to methane emissions. So this panel is going to examine the programs that locate and cap these wells to preserve the area's environmental wealth with an eye towards mitigating broader impacts. So please help me welcome our distinguished guests. Okay. So we have Stephen Roberts, a project manager for Moody and Associates. He has 10 years of experience in environmental consulting and worked in oil and gas before that. Stephen has ample experience in locating orphan oil and gas wells, using desktop methods and identifying them in the field. Stephen has worked on gas migration complaints where orphaned oil and gas wells were located in migration routes from new production wells to nearby residences. Okay. Elizabeth Lieberknecht is a policy and program manager with the Environmental Defense Fund Energy Transition Program, working to reduce climate and air pollution from the oil and gas industry in Texas and Louisiana and from marginal and idle wells. Before joining the Defense Fund, Elizabeth served as a staff attorney at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, where she supported the state's compliance and enforcement activities through multimedia enforcement litigation and program support focusing on air. And then finally, we have Dan Brockett, who leads the Penn State Extension Energy Education Team. He lectures and teaches on energy development, the economics driving the energy development process, the process and politics of energy development, and the associated impacts to agricultural land and people. Throughout 2025, he's led a project around orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells across Pennsylvania. Recently, the Penn State Energy team has shifted focus to AI data center development, and he has the opportunity to provide training for industry, elected officials, farmers, businesses, investors, regulators, and for landowners throughout the country and around the world. So let me just jump right in, and let me just make a general question to all of you. It's just kind of what brought you your interest to orphan oil wells, and maybe describe some of the work that you're doing. Maybe Stephen, could I start with you?
Yeah, sure. Are you able to throw up that?
Someone took the clicker, so someone back there will throw them up for you.
Throw up the figure of the map with the wells on it. Not that one.
That's Elizabeth's right there. So keep going.
I don't think there's a map.
Did we not get it?
There's just pictures.
Yeah, I think Stephen, we just have
We
your
didn't get the
pictures. I don't
figure?
think we
Okay.
have your
Well, but we're going to start, he said local, and we'll start very local. We did a project at this site for Oil Region Alliance, and part of that process was finding the old wells back behind the hill here. There's a multitude of things to look at when you're trying to do that, and they're not all in one spot. There's farmline maps made in the 30s, 40s that we used mostly doing this, and we overlaid them in ArcGIS. We came out and we started walking the hills. The things you find, I don't know if we can scroll through some of these. Keep going. So you'll have steel casing, and if you want to do a drone survey, you can find things like that doing that. But there's another one in here that's a wooden casing. Yeah, so that's an old wooden casing that's fallen over, and you're not going to find that with a drone survey. You just got to walk the roads in the woods, find somewhere that they might have been able to shove a rig back and start poking around. This is an old line that grew through a tree, which is just kind of neat. There's just all this relic stuff out in this area that you just have to go out and look because it's not on maps anywhere. So.
So could I throw a question in, maybe,
Yeah.
as a bit of a transition over to Elizabeth, and maybe Stephen or Dan as well, if you want to answer. So realistically, how much or how many of the orphan wells that are out there could we expect to find, and how can we get a better or a more fulsome accounting of the orphaned equipment that remains?
Sure, I'll jump in and then let Dan, can y'all hear me? Okay, thank you. Elaborate on the real locally based sense of the inventory, but kind of at a high level, what brings me personally and EDF to the work here on locating, identifying, documenting orphaned and abandoned wells is that we know, especially in a place like Pennsylvania where oil and gas production really started, right? Just for full disclosure, as you heard, I'm from Texas, which is a very different place, right? And it's not lost on me just driving through this morning that, the landscape, the energy production is is also very different in the sense of, y'all started developing these resources before there were regulatory states, right? And so part of what we focus on in reducing the local and also global impacts of oil and gas and protecting communities and workers and doing so in a way that is consistent with real world needs around energy and in the midst of a transition where we're, I think, especially here, kind of seeing the transition of our whole industrial structure from what started in the 1800s to where we are now. It's vastly different, and part of the challenge as a society that we see, right, and it's resonant with stakeholders from all different places in the country and for different reasons, but that on the oil and gas side, to really minimize those local impacts like groundwater contamination, like on air emissions that can harm people and communities, is to make sure that we can really know where all of those risks are and work together to minimize them. And so on the legacy infrastructure side, in Pennsylvania, I think there's somewhere between 300,000 and 700,000 undocumented abandoned wells across the state. I think concentrated, y'all would know better, but in the areas where you would have expected those resources to be developed historically, right? So these wells create risks for communities in that they can contaminate groundwater. The methane and other gases in the hydrocarbon stream can move around if the subsurface is disturbed, and there are conduits, right? Pipelines, wellheads, well bores, all those things, creating risks of vapor intrusion, and these folks, and Dan particularly can speak to the explosive risk more specifically, but I guess kind of higher level, like we think it's important to ensure that as we're continuing to develop resources, that we do so responsibly for both the workers and the people in the communities where those resources are situated. And then also our broader community, but really here, I think, as I understand, my colleagues Adam Peltz and Meg Coleman and my colleague here John Rutecki are all much more grounded in this local place. But I think it sounds to me like y'all have an incredible challenge in finding and documenting these wells, but I think also the moment now that we're in is that there are resources from the federal government available to find and remediate this contamination, to protect our subsurface, our communities, including money from the Regrow Act, which became part of the IIJA, which infrastructure, I always, y'all know what I'm talking about, hopefully. I always blank on the actual, it had so many names, and then I just think IIJA, because I've frankly was more involved in a similar program, the methane emissions reduction program, which is follows a similar kind of structure. But all that to say, these federal resources are based on your inventory largely, right? And so if Pennsylvania gets a smaller slice of that federal bucket of resources to plug, or not necessarily plug, but address your, find, and I guess these wells are really those that are so old and so abandoned and might not be used anymore. But all that to say, to get a bigger slice of the resources and pie to protect communities and invest in local jobs to find, plug, and remediate, if that's what's called for, these wells, then there's a great opportunity to protect and preserve and create a more resilient local community while benefiting a broader one. So do you have anything to add, Dan?
Sure. I get paid by the word, so I have a lot to add.
I should.
I have a unique contract with Penn State, not as unique as Coach Franklin, I will say, if you didn't get that joke. Sorry. So, so I'm Dan Brockett. I work for the College of Agriculture at Penn State and Penn State Extension. And Penn State Extension became a thing, a land-grant university became a thing when we discovered that there was a lot of knowledge and things being built at universities that no one would ever really use. And so they had to find people with kind of a medium to low IQ, put them out here in the field, and that's why I'm here today, is to explain what this concept is at this level, okay? So don't get too sophisticated. First of all, Elizabeth, I wasn't sure if you were from Texas until you said yaw twice. She's real, she's legit, okay? We know that now. So let me tell you my interest in orphan and abandoned wells. Farmers and landowners are, my people, right? So looking at this region, not just this area, but across this traditional conventional oil and gas region of Pennsylvania, look at a lot of potential issues with this old infrastructure. Among other things, I just see a lot of farmers plowing and planting around old oil and gas infrastructure. I see a lot of trips and falls and cuts and tractor mishaps and those sorts of things. The most extreme is about once every 4 years we blow up a home in Pennsylvania, and that's almost always a well that has no purpose, has no useful purpose. Okay. And one of the things I like to try to preach to my friends who are getting free gas, and especially maybe illegal free gas that they piped up, I'm a do-it-yourselfer, I do my own dental work, that's true, is free gas is not worth $1 billion. We can put a very direct number on that, okay? So I'll tell you how I got started on this, because it was because of EDF. And any of you remember about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, they were flying drones through parts of this region, and they invited some folks to come. They did it all right, because instead of just going and doing it, they held some community meetings and said, hey, here's what we're going to do so you're not alarmed when there's these drones flying over your head, because I got a lot of neighbors who they're going to shoot them, right? Mm-hmm. So they did that right. And then they had a little problem, because anyone, a bow hunter in the room here? Anybody? There's two of us, Ken. Thank you for showing up, right? Imagine sitting in the tree by yourself and you hear this bzzz, what's that? And then 5 minutes later, here it comes again. So, but I talked to Adam at that time, and I said, why wouldn't we approach our farmers and landowners? Most of our farmers and landowners in this region, they're multi-generational. They grew up on that property, their parents, maybe grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. I think they know where all the bodies are buried, okay? So why wouldn't we talk to them and do that? And they were great about it and said, yeah, just write a proposal and we'll do that. So that led into a series of mistakes. I thought, well, we could do this in the summer with a couple of interns, and their only job is to figure out the technology part. GPS on their phone, take a picture, submit this to DEP, we're all good. And that didn't work, because in the summer you can't find them. Right, and they're interns. They're not oil and gas specialists. They don't go out like this guy does, and he has a pattern and a way to do that. So that didn't work very well at all. And to EDF's great credit, because I said, I think we can get 200, 300, 400 wells easy, and they were saying, how many do you have so far? I'm up to 14. They said, we're learning from mistakes. And so based on my number of mistakes, EDF owes me $1 million. It's great. It'll be great. But here's what we've discovered is on most of these properties, landowners, by the way, who are nervous about letting anyone out there, I thought I was friends with everybody, I'm with Penn State Extension. We're not a regulator. We put your kids through 4-H. We go out there and tell you how to grow soybeans, right? We're here to help you, not to hurt you. there were still a lot of people who were nervous about that. At the same time, rightfully so, the cost to plug a well, Steve, 30,000 plus?
It
I mean,
depends
that's
on
probably
well,
the
yeah.
basement,
Well,
right?
you could get a shallow well and do it pretty cheap.
Okay,
That's,
yeah.
that's part of the thing with the federal funding is you get so much money to plug, these 20 wells or whatever. And most of them are going to be straightforward, simple, cheap, but then you run into the one or two problem childs that they just balloon your costs.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there? Sorry,
Yeah.
since I have the microphone over here. Just could you take us through that process? So if you find an abandoned well on a site, kind of what's the process from identification through remediation, and what are the risks or benefits to the landowner?
As far as plugging it,
Yeah.
generally we wouldn't plug it.
Okay.
But with this federal funding,
Okay.
you have operators who were, price of oil's down. They don't have, they don't want to lay off their employees, but you've
Okay.
got federal funding available, so they're not out drilling, but they can go out and get this money and go plug wells.
Okay.
And that's-
So if you find an abandoned well, though, say in a farmer's field, kind of what steps are you taking? You're just identifying and monitoring?
Yeah, and you would try to look through old resources, figure out how deep it might be, because
Okay.
especially a lot of the reason we're doing it is for unconventional wells in the area of review studies. And you want to know how far, if the well's only 100 feet and your lateral is, 5,000 feet underground,
Yeah.
there's probably not going to be a connection. But if it's a 3,000-foot well, then you have to worry about self-migrating.
Gotcha.
So.
And Dan, I'm sorry, I think I disrupted your flow.
No, you're fine. So,
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
jump in
Yeah.
and just kind of piggyback on that a little bit and just, I am from Texas, but I kind of interestingly, I was talking to some colleagues the other day. My family's from here. My parents grew up in Philadelphia, and my husband's family grew up in Sharon. But I've only spent, I don't know, less than a day here probably in my whole life, and so I want to definitely appreciate that. I don't have all of that the local background, but will say I think the opportunity that we saw and I guess I want to just acknowledge the value in learning from mistakes right now in this moment in time on this challenge. My sense, and part of the reason why I'm here is because I'm working a lot with Adam and Meg on the intersection of preventing future orphans, making sure that wells are plugged at the end of their useful life by their responsible owner, which is, I think a big asterisk for this conversation is that so many of these wells really don't have a responsible owner, right? In the sense that, especially myself as a former regulator, think about an owner and operator, right? It's a different situation. But I guess all that to say, one of the most exciting things about this project that I've learned over the last couple of weeks is just the way that y'all have been able to work together to really sort of multiply the opportunity and of the federal funding for, I think, an issue that is really only starting to come into grasp for communities around the country, how to manage, identify first, and then figure out how to manage this legacy infrastructure that was developed, across the country in very unique ways for the geology and the resources that are there, right? So all that to say, that investment through the IIJA allowed DOE to not only, provide funds for states and industry to work on plugging and remediating this legacy infrastructure, but also a big investment in the tools that we need to actually do the work to find them, right? So the technologies that Dan and the folks on the PAW project, the Pennsylvania Abandoned Well project that EDF is involved in, are really taking those technologies that were developed as sort of innovative technologies through research institutions, including Nettle in Pittsburgh, right? So taking those, putting them out into the field and kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't, and that's going to change a lot depending on where you are, right? And like, for example, in Texas, I'm thinking from this conversation, like, we have a whole list of what are called P13 wells, which were wildcat wells, didn't turn up any product, And so they got converted along to water wells at some point in the system. So now they're TCEQ's job to regulate and make sure that they don't create a risk, right? But it's really an oil and gas hole in the ground, right? So all that to say, I think, it's, if I kind of zoom out and think about, this challenge across the whole country and kind of then zoom back in here, I think there's a ton of valuable information that y'all are learning on the ground here to use the technologies like the drones. Y'all are doing backpack, like Adam says, imagine like a Ghostbuster backpack, with a magnetometer and air, or, we have a lot of experience in the methane context and distribution lines in cities and even in oil and gas in more rural places on using, remote sensors that are on vehicles, right? Like vans that drive around and just look for the plumes as a way to help find the infrastructure. So I think it's not lost on me the size of the challenge, but I think we're also better equipped now than we ever have been to create that list and with all of our stakeholders. And it's places like these where we can really, talk across kind of interests and cultural differences and, what we value and where the assets are to work together to at least identify our challenge and then, ideally work to find solutions that benefit us all.
Yeah, so some of you might think, so if we have 300 to 700,000 wells, they're not all a problem, okay? Most of them aren't, right? Most of them are passive. They're sitting there. They're really not bothering anybody. A lot of them are cut down very small. Actually, my wife and I found quite a number of wells where the casing was pulled for World War II purposes, most likely. So what's the issue? Why would we want to find these? Now, Elizabeth pulled out this great point that part of it is the basis of plugging money that'll come to Pennsylvania is based on the number of wells we have documented. But so far, just on our little project, we're up to about 200 wells. I got past that 14 mark. I know you're proud of me, Sam. Thank you. All right. 3 of them are a problem out of 200. 3 of them have a problem. A couple of them look like danger. Okay, looks like something bad.
What do you mean
could
by
happen.
problem?
They're leaking such a massive amount of methane, and there's some resulting spills on the ground, probably from a while ago, where nothing can grow. Okay.
And it could just be from straight gas migration.
Yeah. But the one well in particular, 7,000 feet in depth, it's never produced, drilled in 1980. When we were measuring methane emissions, when I say we, I don't do the smart work. It was smart people doing that, right? But we built a tent around there we built a methane bomb in about 11 seconds. It's leaking pretty hard, home nearby, all those kind of things. So 3 out of 200, pretty low. That means 197, pretty good shape, probably a trip, an interference in a farmer's field, but not a big deal. But we don't know which 3 that is. We don't know where that 1 or 2% is until we find more, right? I think experienced guys like you probably have an idea of where that's coming from. Oh, in this area you might find this, in this area we might find that.
Oh, you have people who say, who knows, maybe there's something down there, and they drill a deep well.
Yeah.
Way back when, and it could be anywhere, just trying. So,
but to pull this back to the folks that I like to try to help our farmers and landowners. One of the things that is these properties, if we document this and get those properties in better shape, they're leaving a better legacy to their kids and grandkids, because those properties may have a lesser value, or someone may be responsible down the road, okay, for those, right? For the most part, landowners are not responsible for all of those wells, all that infrastructure on their property, unless that well is listed in their deed as belonging to them, okay? And that's an important message, right? Unless it's there. Even if you receive royalties, you're uncle, your grandpa, everybody receive royalties. Royalty is just a lease. You don't own that well unless it's listed in your, on your property. What we try to do for landowners is, look, let's talk, let's investigate what you have. I'm not here to enforce any rules. I'm here to try to help clean up that problem for you and your family and so forth. I use grandkids because some people don't like their kids, but everyone likes their grandkids, right? So we can do all those things. Now, here's my question to you guys. I'm kind of cavalier in saying, hey, 197 wells aren't a problem. Am I wrong?
Depends what you mean by a problem.
I would say an unplugged well creates a risk of a problem, right? Generally, and unless you know more about the well.
Are we just talking methane, or are we talking?
No,
Yeah,
I mean, it's groundwater
where-
contamination, it's
Right.
methane, it's less property value. I mean, there's research showing just the presence of the wells, right, can lower your property value. There, I mean, I guess on the flip side, well, you're talking about problems, but I mean, just to plug, there's an incredible workforce development opportunity, right? But speaking of, assessing the problem, I think it's hard to say when you don't have a full accounting of the population and an understanding of where they are, you can't really assess the risk from our perspective in order to rule out that they could be a problem, right? And then again, of course, it depends what you're looking at, right? Like to your point, are you talking about methane? Are you talking about
Yeah, I mean,
groundwater
most of the ones
contamination?
up on the hill behind here aren't a problem. But you have an old wooden casing, and that, it's been 100 years more, and it just rots away, and now you have this giant hole in the ground. You got someone back there hunting, and now you've got a liability issue. So,
I mean, I think this is a dynamic resource as well, right? I mean, I'm a non-technical professional, so I'm not a professional engineer or in the oil and gas industry with that kind of background. But I mean, I think, just in terms of, thinking about them as sources of pollution, potential sources of pollution, right? I mean, that risk exists. And then you've also got the kind of the surface use, and then we talked a little bit too about future threats to the subsurface, right? So I think if you've got a bunch of conduits to your subsurface that could potentially interfere with carbon sequestration storage, that's a big problem in the Permian Basin right now. We're seeing a lot of surface interruption from produced water injections that are, with all the conduits from the legacy infrastructure there, finding its way back up into producing zones or up to the surface in geysers. So I think as long as, again, from our perspective, as long as they're, unplugged and really undocumented and uncharacterized, there's a risk.
yeah.
Can I jump in again? Sorry, I'm over here on the side. I just, every now and again, I'm feeling left out.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks. Dan, to go back to something you said, right, about the landowners, right, aren't legally responsible, right, for the legacy infrastructure that's left on their site. Are you finding that that's limiting impact or limiting participation in your efforts to find some of this infrastructure? As you go out into the communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say there's a fairly deep suspicion of DEP from farmers and landowners. Is that news to anybody here, right? And that's not necessarily fair. I would say our local oil and gas inspectors in this region are very reasonable, very approachable, decent people who are trying to do their jobs. But there's still a legacy of, what if somebody comes and finds me responsible? We were on a property, they have 100 wells. Do the math, even at the cheap, hey, we're going to do this for $15,000 a well, times 100 wells, right? That's pretty hard to swallow.
Yeah,
So-
farmer's not going to go do that himself.
No. So incidentally, how did we get here? anyone have an idea of how many wells were drilled in Pennsylvania between 1859, that was our first well, right? And 1956, which is the first time we required well permits in Pennsylvania. So that's 97 years. So none of those wells would have been permitted and therefore documented. So that's not anyone's fault. It just developed and happened that way, right?
Some of them are documented, not.
They are now.
Yeah.
Well, we have about 25,000 documented orphaned or abandoned wells, and best guess is someplace between 300 and 700,000 unidentified wells. So again, just to put it in finer point, let me see if I can get the numbers. So there's about 4.7 billion in federal resources from the IIJA, the Regrow Act, and Pennsylvania is scheduled to receive about 400 million. Does that sound right, Dan? And to the point about how,
As far as it's money, I don't know.
I don't think it's that much. I don't think.
but I think as large as that 400 million sounds, again, to the point, if you're only getting a share based on 25,000 orphan wells and you actually have 700,000, then you're missing out on some research, which I understand. Again, like kind of stepping back to the bigger picture of the end of life well sort of retirement obligation. Ultimately, and again, like some of this is complex here, right, because of that history that Dan just mentioned about when the regulations come in and the permitting side. But without the framework where operators are closing wells at the end of their useful life with their money, industry money, right, which is sort of the ideal framework and the way that most programs work in other states, right? You've got financial assurance, you've got an obligation under the law to close your well when you're done producing it, and there is a kind of state fund for last resort, right? And in Texas, we've got an orphan well fund that industry supports, and then we've got new legislation mandating that the Railroad Commission go out and find those idle wells and make sure that they're being plugged at the end of their useful life. But all that to say, without I think my sense is that we are building the ecosystem across the country so that the states who have the local knowledge of the regulated community, boots on the ground, and in-state partners are helping to create the inventory and then setting up the state structures for what makes sense there, so that the work continues with this burst of hopefully funding from the federal government, but that we can create a better kind of regulatory system where the states are better positioned to do this without the occasional onslaught of or influx of federal funding.
Are you all well resourced enough, no pun intended, right, to do the investigation and find the orphan wells? Is there enough funding available for that at this point in time? What's your limiter to your effort? Is it funding? Is it just pure bandwidth?
Through industry, we
Yeah.
find a ton.
Yeah.
But the problem is that's only where new production wells are happening.
Okay.
So that's where the Marcellus is happening. So there's other parts of the state. I mean, they're not drilling Marcellus wells up in the Allegheny National Forest, but there's tons of old legacy wells up there. So nobody's going out there and trying to locate these old wells. A lot of the state industry has found a lot of them. And this is all submitted to the DEP, so they have that information. I don't think it's digitized or anything at this point, but it's all available. But yeah, there's still large swaths of the state, an area that's not happening in, and how do you bridge that gap in those areas?
Yeah, so just to put, because the numbers, when we go, it's 27,000, and then the number between, at the low end, 300,000. So just because my honeymoon's coming up soon, so I took my wife on a romantic walk in McKean County up and down a mountain a couple weeks ago, and we spent 10 hours to find 56 wells. And we were boogieing, and we had a landowner there with Onyx who mapped every one of them, and we were taking pictures. Do the math. get me to 300,000. We can't do it that way, okay? We know what we're doing. The landowner knew what they were doing. We can't do it that way, okay? So we need to come up with some better ways. The old farm line maps, the old U.S. Geological Service maps. These guys hand drew on these maps. There were surveyors. They're usually pretty darn accurate,
Yeah,
right?
pretty
And so using that technology to find those, but we have to really rely on landowners and so forth. Lumber companies have been, timber companies have been able to do this in a pretty big way. It interferes with their operations when they're out there having all this stuff in there. If we can talk those folks into taking that GPS, taking that picture, that's 2 more steps down the line. Now, at some point, we do have to figure out, to your point, how do we get those on the state database maps, right? Because they have those tools too. They have the farm line maps. They have the U.S. Geological
They
Service
have
maps.
the industry submitted ALRs.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so.
And I will say, you know, we try to be agnostic here at Penn State Extension, but the shale industry, the oil and gas industry, has plugged a boatload of wells where they're operating.
Yep.
And we need to appreciate that they went in and said, we're doing everything in this footprint, go find them for me, right?
I mean, that it saves them money in the long run. If they have a stray gas incident, then they're shutting down, you know, completions operations and sitting there for a month while they try to figure out where the gas is going and, you know, who's affected, which residences, you know, it's
Yeah.
saves them money by plugging these wells off. So.
So,
Probably a good point about just, you know, the sooner we, I mean, back to the risk point, right? It's like, unless we have a good inventory and a good sense of where the wells are and what the risks are, it's, you know, it's hard to make those kind of priority decisions about, you know, minimizing risk. But it's a lot cheaper to, you know, get to make your own decision about when to plug a well that doesn't need to be produced anymore versus waiting until it becomes a problem or explodes, right? It's, you know, the free gas isn't worth $1 billion sort of idea
Yeah.
on a bigger scale, right? In my mind.
So I do want to mention this. Among the funding that EDF gave us, this was Adam's idea. He is a genius, okay? We're paying, I shouldn't say we, I don't pay anybody anything, right? But someone is paying landowners $100 for every undocumented well they find. And that's actually a much cheaper method than anything else. And I'm not opposed to using drones and technology. I personally currently think that we're better off looking at a lot of this old map, old data, converting it digitally and honing in on where those spots are. They're remarkably accurate, okay? Turns out those guys in 1956 out there with their rulers and pencils and so forth did a remarkable job of locating those things, and so that work is done, right? It's been done, and I think we could do it that way. But EDF has said, hey, let's incent folks to do the hard work of documenting these things. So I want to thank you guys for that, because that's not, by the way, that's all privately funded, and we appreciate that, and I appreciate that it comes with no strings, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I heard a little bit from Adam about that, and I think it just kind of speaks to the, you know, opportunity we have again here to, like, we have a bunch of new technologies, including, you know, digitization tools, right? Like there are some, I'm blanking on which, I think it's Indiana University and maybe Harrisburg that are doing a project to, you know, use technologies to digitize those old maps, right? And kind of build the list. And then, as I understand, part, you know, makes sense to me, but I think when we talked a little bit about just, you know, there's a role for DEP, right, to go and ground truth maybe, and then incorporate the lists into their lists. But I think, you know, one thing that, you know, we learned about this this, I think Adam uses the word bounty, so like, you
Yeah.
know, and I
Yeah.
think about it a lot, and I love that idea, again, going back to my P13 wells in Texas. You know, the landowners know where they are, right? And it benefits them, you know, to kind of get it in the system, especially if there are financial incentives to help them, you know, fix the problem if it is one. Which of course, you know, again, we think any unplugged well creates a risk, and therefore is a problem. But I guess the other point, just like, I mean, that's a little bit of I don't want to say trial and error because it feels too casual, but I do think it's like we are sort of societally in this learning phase, right? And I think this project has been exciting for the team because it's, you know, we're testing a whole bunch of different technologies and things that y'all are just kind of coming up with in the field as you're like going out and trying to do it the way that you designed and finding this could be done better, right? So I think there's just an incredible amount of local knowledge and work to do for communities and local researchers and folks that want to invest in protecting the places that they live in and love from the kinds of risks that we've talked about a little bit. So I mean, I think to me, it's very exciting, even though you feel like you're in the middle of a summer that didn't go the way you, or at the end of a summer that didn't go the way you wanted to in terms of finding the numbers of wells. But it makes a lot of sense to me that y'all are, you know, kind of figuring out what works as you're doing it.
So Elizabeth has alluded to a couple times kind of local knowledge and skill and so forth. One of, you know, there's 100 issues on the way to getting these done. One of the things that I think we've all known for a lot of years is, you know, we don't have enough well pluggers, okay? And that's the companies and the employees. We don't have enough. And this is maybe somewhat of a unique skill set because where we have, you know, the technology that really drove shale gas development is just incredible. But there's a method and there's a protocol, and now we don't experiment much more in the field. But when we're running across these older wells, we really need people who have that legacy knowledge, okay? And we need those people who can figure out how to get out in the middle of that stream bank or how to get up over that mountain of trees and so forth. So getting there is part of it, and then the well's part of it. So I think there's maybe an incredible workforce opportunity for those of us who are in this legacy well area to send folks out who can make a good living plugging wells for the next 100 years. It's not going to run out, okay? So just throwing that out.
Yeah, and like I said, when the price of oil's down, you know, these guys, these conventional drillers, and they're looking for something to do, and there's federal funding out there, that's when they're going to go out and start plugging wells.
But there's specifically well plugging companies now that are just, that's what they
what
do.
they're
They're
doing,
not
yeah.
drilling any.
Yeah.
They're plugging
Right.
them, right?
Yeah, and but it's these conventional drillers around, you know, these areas that do have that knowledge of
All right.
the legacy stuff.
So if I can interject again, first off, Steve had a really good map that he gave us that I forgot to get into the slide deck that shows it looks like about 12 orphaned wells. Not this one. There's one here on my computer, right? About 12 orphaned wells within a 5-minute walk of where we're standing. So
It has the farm
Yeah.
line map, because he was talking
Yeah.
about how accurate the farm line maps are, and we
yeah,
overlaid it.
it
and shows those
looks to be
spots.
incredibly looks to be incredibly accurate. So we're getting down to like our last 10 minutes of the panel here. Given especially that this is of local interest, would like to throw it out to the audience to see if there's any questions. I don't know if we have a roving microphone that we can use, or if not, just shout really loud and I can repeat it. Please.
I have lots I could say on this. I'm of the opinion that, number one, trying to do this massive finding of old wells is a waste of resources. Because we already have, even with this massive amount of federal money coming to Pennsylvania, it's not even going to plug the 30,000 you're talking about, especially if you're plugging under the current regime that they're required to do. And that is, you know, the cost of plugging these wells using the restrictions that government puts on it, both fixed, state, and federal, is making the cost of these wells, I think the average cost to plug these wells so far is over $100,000 per well. Compare that to I was at a meeting probably a year ago of a gentleman who said, who's in the business. He said, I just plugged 3 wells for $15,000 and I made a profit. You know, there is I mean, no doubt some wells are very expensive to plug, but the government regime of plugging these wells includes things like prevailing wage, other kinds of restrictions that vastly inflates the cost of plugging wells. And so I think resources, or as a matter of fact, we put in place for Pennsylvania a program, a grant program, using a percentage of that federal money, setting it aside to say, producers who find wells, plug them on their own, we will give them a small grant on the back end for their work. Here we are, a couple years later, and DEP has not given out one dime of that money. This is a way to keep the conventional industry profitable, get wells plugged very cheaply, and keep that institutional knowledge of how to plug these very old wells. It makes sense so many ways, but we can't get that money out to plug wells. DEP, again, they are contracting very expensive, the plugging of the wells so far. And in addition, they've added all kinds of, I think 40 new employees to oversee this federal money. I think we're wasting resources. We should be using the money as efficiently as possible to plug wells instead of finding new wells and running the plugging through the state regime for how we do that.
Panel, any commentary? Any response?
I could talk for hours.
Yeah, let me throw something out there, because I see the same numbers you do, that over $100,000 per well thing. I will give DEP a pass on this. When they're plugging, emergency plugging and those kind of things, that's going to cost extra. So I would expect that number to be far greater than, far greater than typical. Here's where I would maybe take issue with you, Senator, when you say, let's not find any more. Let's not assume that we should plug the 30,000 that we found already, all right? Because there's a number of them. I think that would be, that's why I asked these folks, am I wrong? If I have a 200-foot old oil well back here on this property, which I very well might have, right? And it doesn't appear to be hurt, why am I messing with that well, right? Why am I putting money into that well? So my point is not to say, hey, let's find them all and plug them all. Not going to happen. It'll never happen. We don't have the time or the money, right? My point is to say, let's find the worst of these and do it in the most cost-effective way we can, right?
I think conventional who are working today are going to find a lot more wells.
100%, absolutely.
Out in the fields,
Yeah,
to their economic advantage.
they're out in some fields. They're out in some fields, yeah. Right.
That's another discussion of what we should do to have them in more fields.
Yeah,
Weaver Refinery is going to be struggling to stay open.
yeah. So I would just say, look, I don't disagree with you on the efficiency of the process of plugging these wells, but it's to say, let's not go find more because we can't get this done with what we have.
Let's not use government resources.
Okay. I'm okay. I'm trying to stay neutral.
That's the numbers are gonna get higher anyway.
Yeah.
We're gonna find them on their property and report them. An education piece is part of it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah, how many
we
people
wanna
know?
find these, find you out on your property and look.
Go ahead, Stephen, you were
How
saying
how
something.
many people know that they could get $100 for doing that? Yeah, nobody knows that, so, I mean, it's.
Which is a private arrangement, right?
Yeah.
To your point. I mean, well, I mean, just that
Yeah.
one example, right? I mean, I hear what you're saying about the grant, the state grant program, and opening up, an incentive for operators using those resources. But, I mean, from my perspective, the federal funding has given us an opportunity to document and assess the landscape, right? And across the country, and I'm learning more about how that's happening in Pennsylvania, but tend to agree that for kind of big picture on the over time, it's a matter, like, you can't do everything all at once, right? So in order to prioritize addressing risks from legacy infrastructure that are the most, threatening to local communities, drinking water or homes or future energy production, then you have to be able to know which ones are the worst. And you don't know unless you know how many there are, right? And take some measurements and assess what those risks are. But I definitely agree that it's a huge population of wells, not only here, but
Do we have,
elsewhere, right?
I'm sorry,
Just
one,
you've got to prioritize.
understood. Do we have any other questions? Or, please?
This is, I'm more familiar with Oklahoma, Texas stuff, and down there sometimes there's old wells, they've been drilled. When they drill, they file the depth and what they were looking for. Sometimes they were looking for oil, they found gas, they abandoned it, or something, they capped it a bad way, or just closed it. And some of those wells have value now. Not necessarily, price of natural gas is down, but there's other uses for, as we discussed, whether it's sequestration for carbon credits, or it's using it to fuel data centers, or finding helium as a component of some of these gases, which now has a greater value. Is there any value to some of the old wells that are out there that, you mentioned one that's a problem, belching methane out? I mean, is there a way to look at some of these things as a resource as opposed to just an albatross?
I think so, and I think that this is the issue. So I don't think anyone is defending wells that aren't. If a well isn't providing some value to somebody, who's defending it, right? So some of those wells that may have a tremendous amount of methane still coming. My assumption is that operator walked away from that because the value there was a problem with that well. It never produced. So drilled in 1980 to a depth of 7,000 feet, right, which is unusual for this area.
My guess is the casing is
Right.
compromised as well.
And there's a problem. So I think that operator walked away from that. However, your point is great. If we're looking at injection, which is a little bit of a dirty word in this region, but we could also be looking at a geothermal resource, right? Why wouldn't I use what's there and so forth? So those are all possibilities in my mind. For a lot of our old wells, like we've discovered here, that probably isn't the case, but those wells may not be an issue either. But certainly if you can, somebody can recapture that methane resource that's there, put it in a pipeline, Godspeed, let's do it.
Well, helium used to be, again, just as an example, the viability of the well and the percentage was much different than it is today. So perhaps it's been overlooked, the component gas is more useful than it was in the past. Whoever walked away didn't care.
Right, that's sort of the kind of beauty of the dynamism of our subsurface resources in this country, right? I mean, it's there's a paper, I'll don't have it handy, but I'm happy to connect you with it. Examining really the future kind of solar, wind, and geothermal potential at abandoned sites across the country, and found a huge overlap. I mean, in part because, it looks a lot different. I mean, we're not talking about, wells in the middle of streams, but like to the extent you have, disturbed surface and infrastructure there. I mean, and there's opportunity to store energy in wells, right? Like not only just on the generation side, but just, so absolutely. And I mean, I think that also creates the opportunity to like make it a positive financial situation for entrepreneurs, for energy companies that are looking to, tap into additional, future energy generation that looks a lot like, I'm thinking about geothermal a lot, and, part of, I think there's a huge amount of potential, and again, kind of speaks to like, also when you're drilling geothermal wells, like it matters if your subsurface is full of holes, right? So like, I definitely don't know the local context enough to really opine on what the particular risks are here, but, at the basin scale, in my part of the world, I know industry and operators or regulators and then the public are thinking about a lot. How do we protect the subsurface resource so that we can continue to innovate and meet new energy needs?
I would imagine it would be a regulatory nightmare to get one of these undocumented wells permitted. But
I mean,
Wait. Oh, sorry. I didn't want to cut you off. Okay. I saw one more hand. Let's do that, and then any closing remarks, and then we'll end the panel, please.
Hi, I'm Panelists. I teach at public school, and the job opportunity is interesting to me. So if I had students saying, well, how would I learn to be someone who caps wells? Where is the education for that? How would someone go into this? How does someone enter this?
Well, for actually capping them, you don't need a college education to start working in, the oil and gas field and learning from the other people.
In what capacity would someone apply? Do they put on the job application, I would like to learn to cap wells? How does that process start?
Yeah, I mean, you would need to meet with, have local producers come in, local well drillers. If you're trying to get people into that would be the way to do it, have it at a job fair or something like that.
Do we have anyone in the audience that can answer the question? Yeah.
So around here, this is, I think, one of the real problems is the very people that are going to be capping these wells no longer are drilling and producing wells around here. It's unfortunate. It doesn't have to be a dying industry, but it is a dying industry. There's fewer and fewer people working in conventional wells. I would say start with, Joe Stiglitz, someone I know who's my age, who his family's been in the conventional gas industry for years. Covens, are similar. But the only way that you're getting into the capping industry, the only people I know capping wells are people that for years were drilling wells. Yeah. And so that's how you get into the business. And there is a future there for them. I know there's a ton of frustration on their end. I get the calls of them getting the money once they've done the work. But the longer we don't get that money out there, and also don't allow people to drill wells, the fewer workforce there's going to be. And with every passing year that we're not drilling wells, and also not getting the money to the people we're capping, there's fewer and fewer people willing to do those jobs, or that are doing those jobs. They move on to other things. The guys doing it now, they have plenty of marketable skills doing other things.
And that knowledge leads with them.
The longer we wait on this stuff, the less opportunity there's going to be to actually do the work.
Go ahead.
Just to be able to answer your point, there is currently an apprenticeship program that the DEP is running with the IIJA funding, so there is an opportunity currently to go after an apprenticeship if one wants to, so it's something that is currently funded through Pennsylvania DEP.
Maybe you
The
two
DEP
can
is an
connect.
apprenticeship.
Yeah, yes.
United
So-
Mine Workers and at their Rough Creek Training Center or something.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just maybe maybe the flip side of the debate on the restrictions or the strings on the federal money is that whether you agree with it or not, right? And Doug did create a structure where there's investment in jobs and that's where some of the money is, right? Like earmarked to go. There are additional kind of generally on those programs, like either requirements or additional like kind of subsidies or opportunities of money. The more you invest in doing the returning the workforce development and the kind of the living wage piece, right? But I mean, I appreciate that sounds better on paper maybe than it actually works in real life. But all that to say, and John's right, there are a number of existing apprenticeship programs kind of standing up out of those federal resources, and that's certainly something that we're finding really impactful in our work in this space across the country is connecting people with the training and standing up those workforce development, those programs to make sure that we are having the workforce to do the work of making the assessment. Is it going to continue to operate, or does it need to be plugged, and then on what time frame?
Okay, we've got 1 minute left. Any last comments from the panel here? No? No?
All right. Well, I would just throw out to you,
Wasn't trying to put you on the spot.
I think work in the oil field can be rewarding, but I think it's also very hard work. But I think if a young person wants to enter into that field, they can find a great career. But it's, you got to be able to work hard, be there when they want you to be there. Work safe is a huge one, but there's plenty of opportunities here in Northwest Pennsylvania and really around the world. So,
Yeah. Right. With that, Elizabeth, Dan, Steve, thank you so much for your time. Let's give them a round of applause. I think we're set for a break now. Okay. Let me get out of your way here.
First of all, thank you so much, Stephen, and the entire panel. I learned a lot during that discussion, and I just don't sit in panels like that very often where you get literally from the ground up. So thank you so much for putting that together. We're going to take a break now. We're going to have the world's best donuts out in the lobby. Those of you that haven't already snarfed a couple of down yourself from Clark's Donuts. But just before we do that, we're going to reconvene here with our two U.S. representatives, G.T. Thompson and Mike Kelly, at 11 o'clock. But I would just like to thank, in addition to our collaborators, Venango County, and also our three commissioners are here today, Sam Breen, Ken Bryan, and Chip Abramovich, who I'm not sure is here. We'd really like to thank them. We're going to be seeing them throughout the day, and also later today, our dinner at the new Exchange, the Oil City National Bank building, is a major county project and sort of foundation of the renewal of downtown Oil City to at least the glimmer of its former glory. So with that, let's adjourn, and we'll be back here in 30 minutes. Thank you.